Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from South Africa, English and Afrikaans language with English subtitles, released in the year 2021, directed by Jaco Bauer, and this film is called Gaia. So Gaia is set in the South African wilderness. You have a nature reserve that is being approached by two rangers in a canoe. When they get to the shoreline, the main character says to a colleague that she's going to go inside these woods, she's going to document the strange occurrences that have been reported, and she's going to come back with results. But an hour passes and the colleague still hasn't heard from her, and in reality she's injured herself and she's been disconnected from the colleague, so she can't contact him, and so she doesn't know what to do. She's stuck, but then help arrives in the form of two strangers. Now these strangers have been cut off from civilization. They've been living in this nature reserve, and they take her back to the cabin to tend to her wounds. But along the way, not only does she discover the truth behind these strangers, she also discovers the truth behind the nature reserve and how horrifying and beautiful nature can actually be. So what those realizations are is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Gaia. South African cinema has actually been producing some fairly consistently good stuff recently. So ever since Neil Blomkamp created District 9 those many years ago, South Africa really put their hand up as far as the African continent is concerned. No real other nation have created films. Nigeria has created a lot of films, but they are not really that great. So as far as the leader is concerned, South Africa have put their hand up, and so Neil Blomkamp put them on the map. But after that, they've been a little bit scarce. But recently, they have been producing thick and fast, and not only thick and fast, but actually pretty good stuff. So coming into Gaia, I was wondering whether or not this would be another one to add to the memorable pile, or unfortunately discard into the forgettable pile. But after watching the film, I will say that this is a clear example of not needing a mega budget to create a visually arresting film. This is a movie that doesn't come without its problems, but fortunately the positives make it worth at least one viewing. This is very strikingly similar to Ben Wheatley's In the Earth. It's an environmentalist sort of horror film, but it is different in the way that it executes its story. Is that this movie is a lot more surreal and fantastical. You've got Ben Wheatley's In the Earth, that's a hallucinatory trip into a nightmare, whereas this movie has a little bit more of a message. It's really nature and humanity, the fact that we need nature, but nature doesn't really need us, and when nature engulfs humanity, it shows you how insignificant we are, and that's actually a scary thought. And I thought as though they intensified that scary thought through the visuals. The visuals were very unnerving, very similar to Guillermo del Toro's work, and that is very impressive. As I said, coming from a low-budget South African horror film, I wasn't really expecting that. And so the woods in this movie, this nature reserve, was very haunting. There's an invisible presence about it that I thought sent the hairs on the back of your neck up. I thought, all right, well, something is wrong, but what is it? And so the movie really does play on that. And so the fact is that nature in this film is a character of its own, and because you can't actually see specifically what nature is doing, you know that something is wrong and that help is not around. And so how insignificant we are compared to nature is ultimately what the movie plays on. I thought it played on it actually quite decently. So it's a very impressive film as far as production is concerned. There were some very, very unnerving set pieces that this movie has that I thought really freaked me out, and so the creepiness is intensified and sustained from start to finish. And so it knows exactly the world it wants to create, and it creates it in a way that I thought was definitely worth the experience. As far as low budget horror is concerned, the acting was actually quite decent. It has very limited characters, so the emphasis was on the performances. And so for what they had to play with, I thought as far as low budget cinema is concerned, especially from a country like South Africa, it was actually quite impressive. And I thought as though there was a lot of mystery behind the film. And although that mystery isn't really executed in a very satisfying way, it still makes you wonder what's going on, and so you're never looking at your watch, because you always feel as though there's an avenue of interest around every corner. And so Gaia was impressive in the way it looked, it was impressive in the way it was executed, but unfortunately there were minor issues to this movie that prevented it from being one of the great films. And ultimately these issues start off with the characters. Now, nature was very impressive and nature was very interesting, but unfortunately the human characters don't really complement that element, in that you don't really know anything about them, you don't really care about them. The movie has a strong message on environmentalism and how nature, if it gets angry, can actually fight back, but unfortunately as far as humans are concerned, the movie doesn't really go into anything. And so when there is tender moments that happen, you're supposed to have sympathy, but because you don't really know anything about these people, they're just cardboard cutouts. And so I never really shed a tear where I really should have shed a tear, because there's not enough effort put into the characters. as opposed to the effort that is put into the invisible presence and the overall horror aspects to this movie. But to make it a lot more impactful, it needed that a time and attention to these people, but unfortunately it just doesn't have that. And I will say that the overall message that this movie is trying to deliver, it takes a little bit more time than it really should. And so I kept thinking, I know what point you're trying to make, but can you just get to that point a lot faster? And so there's a little bit of filler. The movie doesn't execute its way in the fluent way that I really wanted it to. So it could have been a little bit shorter. It could have been an hour-long film, and it still would have had the same impact, because I just felt as though there were moments where it became a little bit disjointed and a little bit distracted. And I will say that the villains in this movie are very stereotypical, and I kind of thought as though it went down a very predictable level. So the ending wasn't quite as good as I really wanted it to be. But pushing that aside, as far as a low-budget horror film is concerned, if you like your surreal experiences into hallucinatory hell, then Gaia is definitely one I would recommend. It's very similar to Ben Wheatley's In the Earth, but unfortunately Ben Wheatley's In the Earth, I just thought the world building was a lot better and the overall characters were more interesting, whereas this film, I will still say that although it has negatives, the positives make it a very impressive independent horror film, and one that I'd recommend. So overall for Gaia, going to give this one 3 stars. Go out there and see it. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.